Hello, doctor. My name is Aya Obeid. My presentation is about a new historism literary theory to the Great Gatsby. In this slide, I will answer these questions and will explain the theory. What theory? This presentation will focus on new historism. So, the definition of a new historism is a type of literary theory aimed to explaining historical context by writing and moral via its social background approach. The study of the history concept in 1950 and points to it by its type of social poetic. So, a new historism is an approach of literature focused on the idea which literature must be analyzed and understood in the sense of the writer's past and the critic's past. And it might replace the original, therefore, change of notable critical stance of 1970, predominantly deconstructionism and Marxism. And instead of the history itself, new historism works with the interpretation of history because it claims there are many histories. So the history of the text is highlighted by comparing to the structure of power, culture, and philosophy in a specified period. So new historism repels the idea which past is a chain of actions with a sequential incidental link. It seeks to explain the cultural history, leads the context of the background of concepts of 1950 and applies as a type of modern poetics. So new historism emerged as a backlash toward literary formalism. And historiography is considered by new historians to be related to forced relations, therefore great histories of the past beside the subject. So in such a point, history and fantasy have become linked fictional depictions of the past. In this slide, I will explain the founder of the new historism. The new historism as an approach to recognize speculative history and literature by its educational context was originated by the American scholar Stephen Greenblatt. He researched Shakespeare, the Renaissance, and the New Historism, who is the general editor of the Norton Shakespeare to the Norton Anthology of English Literature, and his main known work is Well in the World. In this slide, I'll explain Michael Foucault and the New Historism. Michael Foucault is a French historian and philosopher in 1926 and 1984. Michael has a main effect on a new historism approach in overall, while in specific by the idea of power. In 1970, Michael and Stephen have employed empirically, therefore they created a new theory called the New Historism. Here the power of Michael seems to be under pressure and always unstable. The power works of Stephen, but the current historism of Stephen is not inherited from Michael's post-structuralists. Michael knows that history is marked by contradictions and fissures. Instead of writing in a cohesively way, modern historicism effaces the gap and the disputes of history. Michael, seeming neglected by the new historians, became exactly the one who, during a series of workshops with Rambo and Rossi and Berkeley in 1983, was dealing with the strategies of self-fashioning that he called. In this slide, the origin of a new historism. The American theorist Stephen Greenblatt invented the word new historism, which expanded in 1988. And it forced a vital way of viewing historical masterpiece which originated like a responding new historism, and the theory centered on Greenblatt's theory literary studies then by Foucault's impact. Michael argues that an era's discourses, instead of representing which exist before enlightenment and rules, which brings into being the ideas, objections, and structure of which it speaks. How these concepts are creation and originature of power or economic pressures. So Harold Bloom condemned a new historism for limiting history to a past reference which doesn't include enough attention to the specific of literature review. And Stephen thinks that there is a modern economic universe which is constantly influenced and structured by the writings it creates. The scholars advocated shift from classical to new historism, and they believed if the genetic events are removed, there is an internal vacuum that occurs. In this slide, we explain the New Historicism popular. New Historicism appeared in 1980 largely by the research of Berkeley English scholar and critic Stephen Greenblatt and University of California. It received massive prominence in 1990. New Historicism effected by Michael Fackles. New historicism structure. New critics of historians attempt to link valuable questions with cultural historical issues. New historians still appear to emphasize that work of literature are not pagan deities, although they may be quite conscientious towards their culture than the ordinary person, which is still engaged in them. So the scene and the description perform of a great national fiction. They act as a laboratory that tackles or avoids historical concerns, dreams, and fascinations. As a result, New Historicism suggests that the best way of understanding fiction is to position it within its cultural background. So the post-structuralist concept that truth is constructed and multiple, and the Fackles idea of the faction power and information formation is applied by New Historicism. In this slide, the important critics of New Historicism. The first one, Stephen Greenblatt, one of the main personalities of New Historicism approach. Greenblatt became famous for his critiques of Shakespeare's works in 1990. The second one, Louis Montrose, a premature member of the New Historicism, and he is a professor of English at the University of California, and his famous work, Races, Fashion, and Poetry. And the third one, H.R. Vassar organized an essay series, New Historicism, that explains the principal concept and the principle of the theory behind the 10 were explored. In this slide, in New Historicism methods, first it analyzes 3 points of concern: the writer's nature and the public laws used in the text and the description of the past days of the project in the text. So New Historicism gives great consideration to the controversies or the seemingly trivial facts of the past, and also the subject resisting broad statements of a text or a time era. So the goal of the theory is not to put the past back, but on the opposite, to condemn the past and to rethink social evaluation. In this slide, explain how analyze a text in New Historicism. First, the modern historic understanding of a text starts with the recognition at the time of its writing of the literary and non-literary text existing and obtainable to the audience. So New Historicism discusses the connection between the writer and the concept that compares those to the text and how they connect, accompanied by the perusal and understanding of the text. And if a famous movie had to introduce a modern expression, so the New Historicism analyzes societies or individuals in parsing the word or phrase and the influence it would have on them. And also Fackles theory analyzes force and experts with discussing his specific skills and penalize. In this slide is a characteristic of a New Historicism. So each text, including its social, cultural, and historical context that shape the pretext, is interpreted in tandem. And the basic concepts of New Historicism and modern humanism are fused. And it's based on the idea which history became formed and fictionalized, and its eventual interaction into the socio-political structures from its development and analysis refer to the veracity of the document, and the distance between main and minor references is admitted by new historians, which transform the task repairing culture on the background main evidence by clarifying the language of modern historicism. So the differences between the new historicism and cultural materialism. So new historicism prefers to focus on those who are at the tip of the society, the church, the government, the political, the elite, and focus on the fictional text within its present day. Second, the new historicism interests in ministry, institution, and education. New historicism relies on the fields of political science and psychology. Then cultural materialism prefers to focus on common people, females, or other oppressed people who are the epitome of society and analyze a job across the period from past to the current time from its social stance. So cultural materialism focuses on gender, finance, and reputation. Cultural materialism relies on sociology and finance. In this slide, so we have new historicism vs old historicism. New historicism aims to create and practices the style of research in which fair measurement is provided to the literary pieces or the non-literary context. So new historicism following Derridian ideas that it is nothing beyond the text, but perhaps invariable or rhetorical compose, removes these structures, pursue a common view of life and culture, as well as sees past as depicted and perceived in written works and interacts heritage of the term. Here you have ancient historicism regarded past as a reference to a shadow of fiction with evidence, so it uses a standard method by defining a fictional structure and putting the work of literature in it. So ancient historicism deals with the heritage of the universe. In this slide you have the advantage of a new historicism. It is written in a clear format and it focuses toward literature and analyzes how the periods of the author influence the writings, well as how the job reflects the condition of the author, realizing in turn the existing educational conditions impact the opinions of the opponents. And it shows the information and makes the inference in a class complex manner, and in the sense of literary theory, the context is always interesting and entirely special. So the content is interesting and unique, and it's on that it is a critical space in new historist work is often acute, but it prevents the issues that found through Max critic. So, a new historicism in The Great Gatsby. Here is The Great Gatsby. It's a novel written in 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Great Gatsby reflects the period in which it has been published and several troubles that occur in the writer's period. In this novel, the writer explains several social issues such as discriminations, fortune alteration principles, and prohibitions. Just time is the most significant example for the writer. Here we have The Great Gatsby. The novel talks about Gatsby who wants back his beloved to him since she married a man from high rank. Second, Nick is the narrator and he narrates the story from his point of view. Also, the novel occurs in 1920. The novel is a figurative depiction of America in 1920, a period of luxury and depravity. So the novel discusses the American dream when Gatsby urged to begin again and wished to leave the past that is part of the broader American dream of traveling to another world and establishing a new one. And this subject is theme and part in the novel. In this slide, we have the American dream in The Great Gatsby. So the American dream is the credence that anyone can be effective and American, irrespective of religious status or ethical, if they had just tried harder sufficiently. So therefore, the American dream provides a reasonably romantic view of the American culture that avoids concerns such as institutional racism, money laundering by the government. and wealth disparity. Also, it implies a social inequality falsely, whereas in fact is that the United States has a very well developed system of classes. So Gatsby was raised in poverty, yet began to gain lavish riches by his job with millionaire Dan. Gatsby's vision for Dicey's passion was motivated by Gatsby's need for money, while Gatsby became capable of accumulating huge wealth. So throughout the event, Gatsby is not achieved Dicey's shares. Those Gatsby visions for Dicey is basically which inevitably led to his death. The given information through this novel that perhaps the American dream couldn't be entirely fulfilled since those who invest in it continually aspire for anything greater than themselves. So Great Gatsby's celebrations were packed with glamour, highlighting Americans' recklessness throughout that period. Even without knowing Gatsby, the people who have not been welcomed nevertheless turned into the celebrations to pleasure. So Gatsby wanted to show his wealth to people, and this is the American dream. While Gatsby was not known anyone, it is just as a celebration for people. So the writer expresses how it can prevent somebody from enjoying the moment by becoming centered upon the American dream, such as Gatsby, who based his vision on Dicey, that he never thought to make a friendship which it is more valuable than wealth. In this slide we have this fortune. Numerous citizens became rich after the First World War and before the economic crisis because of alcohol sales and having inherited wealth. So the writer stated this in his novel when he portrayed Gatsby as a businessman of great riches and power, unlike Tom, who gets his money by legacy. So the base that the writer explains the fortune gap is to differentiate between Eastern and Western eggs. So the description of the writer for Gatsby and Tom and the way of collection their fortune, it is as a sample for speaking at the period of 20th century about American community. So to represent old money, the writer preferred the East, which the people who have old money should live in the East, such as Tom and Dizzy, while the people who have new money live in the West, as Gatsby. Alteration in principles. So in this period, 1920, the principles began to shift by the liberty and wealth. Citizens began to change their life. This period talks about free expressions, business, and independence. So the writer reflects this change in his novel when he talks about the parties of Gatsby and the fertility in that time. So in this period, there are many changes happened, but it was not acceptable by people. The writer reveals that American dreams is possible, but in legal ways, such as Gatsby prosperity, that is based on that he was against the law, and how he changed from poor to rich person and neglected his old values by making huge parties and drinking alcohol. In this slide we have prohibitions. Prohibition refers to something that's prevented by law, such as selling alcohol. Buying and drinking alcohol was unethical in 1920, but several people were drinking alcohol and having parties. Means they were against the law, and many people became wealthy by selling alcohol. So in homes around the world, alcohol spilled like water, and alcohol populated the jails and the refuges of America. There are several Western countries wanted the prohibitions, but America confirmed that it was a useless way to prevent the people. So the Great Gatsby illustrates the way of celebrating and how people were immoral by doing things against the law, and this is the issues of 1920. So the writer depicts the life of Gatsby and the parties that he was doing which were filled with alcohol, and ill people, men and women, were drinking, and it is a way to capture the attention of his beloved. In this slide, we have Jazz Age. The writer knows the immoral and injustice in the Jazz Age time means he criticized the life of high status in 1920. So the writer refers to this period in his novel because the people appears as they are having a nice time in the novel, but it was disappointing. The actors appear very arrogant. Gas players were mostly African, and since the United States was extremely unequal, their success held complicated political repercussions. For example, when the hero died, nobody pretended his burial, but when the hero makes a party, all people attend this, and this is the influence of the gas time, which people just to get pleasure. So in the gas age, the female was excitation, her romantic ambitions, not noticing how she must miss her dignity, which is depicted by Daisy Martley and Jordan. The conventions, greed, and egoism describe the female of this period. So gas period was indicative of the luxury people, which were the reason to become spoiled and influence on people, like Gatsby, who was just cared for money to engage his beloved heart. In this slide, there's references. And thank you for listening.